So welcome to the sixth online Molecules Unlimited event. It's great to see you. Hello to everyone on YouTube. We will be talking around pain and the management of pain tonight. I'll shortly introduce our judge for our poetry competition that's featured in this meeting, Daniel Sluman. It's a great privilege to have him with us tonight and throughout the whole process. And he will say a few words about the competition generally, and then I'll introduce the shortlisted poets that we have here, and then we'll finish with the prize-winning poets, and also Dan will say a few words about those winning entries. Just a few words from me on who we are as a group. So we kind of explore the intersect of the chemical sciences and poetry, and go backwards and forwards. And we're probably the fastest growing group, I think, in poetry now. Nearly 500 members now, and we meet roughly every quarter or so. And this was our first competition, which I think was a great success. Okay, I'm going to introduce Daniel now. So Daniel Sluman is a 37-year-old poet and disability rights activist. He co-edited the first major UK disability poetry anthology, Stares and Whispers, for deaf and disabled poets right back. And he's published 3 poetry collections from Nine Arches Press. His most recent collection, Single Window, was released in September 2021 and was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize. So yeah, love to hear your thoughts, Dan, about the competition.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, well, it was a joy to be asked to judge this, because it's always lovely to be asked to do things, and it's lovely to be in a situation that I am, where I can choose what I say yes to some extent. And when Stephen said it was going to be a competition about pain and pain management, that particularly appealed to me. So I think all of us as humans have an understanding of acute pain that is very simplistic and very straightforward. You put your hand on a hog and your body tells you that something bad is happening. But really beyond that, what I'm interested in is persistent pain, or ideologies around pain, or how we negotiate lives when pain is present in our lives for much longer than that. And so I think there's the stats are something like 1 in 5 adults have chronic pain. It is technically a disease, I think, from the World Health Organization. And what I was really excited to read in these poems, and what I did read, was completely different experiences and points of view. Some people wrote from a kind of chemical point of view about opioids and about the processes that go on in the brain when a body is in pain. A lot of you wrote about your own personal experiences, whether that's kind of acute or chronic pain. Some of you even kind of imagined different people's experiences, ones that were kind of different and kind of more exotic than your own, maybe, about what pain might feel like. And it was just so interesting to see all these different viewpoints. I think every single poem that got shortlisted not only looked at pain from a specific viewpoint, but there was at least another 1 or 2 deciding factors. There was a complex kind of a more complex kind of looking at pain than the other poems. And often in creativity, we talk about something called bisociation, which is the idea that good art is when 2 or more things are kind of crossed over each other, and the sparks from these different things create a different viewpoint, some kind of idea that is then passed on to the reader. And all of the poems in the shortlist did that, so I'm really excited to hear from those. And afterwards, we'll talk a little bit about the 2 poems that got second and first place as well. But yeah, I can talk a little bit more. I mean, I've had chronic pain for about 15 years, and I didn't realize, but I know now, kind of 85% of amputees have chronic pain, and there is something very basic about the idea of cutting a major nerve in your body. That nerve is kind of like a live wire dangling for the rest of your life. It doesn't know that everything's okay. It's constantly firing out. And so many amputees like myself have chronic pain, and 30 to 40% have severe kind of disabling pain. And I'm in a position as well where I was reading a lot of these poems that are about opioids, and I've been on morphine for a long time, which is always interesting because we associate morphine with acute pain, or maybe pain in the elderly, or pain in kind of late stage cancer. But there are millions of us out there who have been taking morphine and its various synthetic relatives every day for years and years and years, and it's how we function. I won't go into the war on opioids, but in terms of that, there's another interesting strand in terms of how we see opioids in this world, and how simplistic we want to see whether they're good or bad. But really, that's my experience, and that's why I wanted to judge this competition. And like I said, I was really pleasantly surprised by all the different viewpoints. So yeah, thanks, Stephen.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, it was lovely to hear those, words there, and that really sets the context really to the evening. Yeah, I mean the brief was, the chemistry link could be either delineated or more tenuous. It didn't really matter too much, and it was wonderful, yeah, to see the variety of responses to the call. Okay, so moving on then, we've got an order of readers, and I think Tessa Foley is up first. Her debut poetry collection, Chalet Between Thick Ears, and follow-up, What Sort of Bird Are You, were published by Live Canon, and she was a previous winner of their International Poetry Prize. She's currently working on her third collection, Try to Find Me, and she has been recognised in the Ware Poets competition, the Charroux Prize, and Arts University Bournemouth Poetry Competition. Tessa works at the Poetry School in London. So it'd be lovely to hear your poem, Tessa, and perhaps how you came to write it. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, thank you so much for Daniel. Thank you very much for shortlisting me. It's an honour. Thank you, and thanks, Stephen, for inviting me to this. It's actually it's a poem about an operation. And it was one of those things where I hadn't really talked about it to anybody, even my partner, just and about the pain that came after, and actually the strange effect of general anaesthetic, which I hadn't really experienced before, and the way it kind of went on, altering my mind for days afterwards. And it was at Christmas a few years ago. That's why it's called Advent. Oh, I shall read it. I took my healthiest body, the one I had at 21, and laid down a king cake baby in their dough. I pretended it was Christmas Day to clear my lungs. My feet were gone, airish plans my lips both had. My chest was edited by clouds. Then they prepared to pack up, cuff, and send away the bits of me they didn't want. I tried to speed it up by puffing, but they'd found a cyst worth a clean pulled knockout punch. Rolling with greasy coins inside the purse, my fine sonata fingers reached out for cotton touch. Caught by brush of brisk kind uniform with the wheels on the bus getting wound and wound, it went black. I was uptown with elbows on the handlebars, seeing stars come at me from the advancing tarmac. I woke up in her lap, the stringy knees of God bearing down, strictly repeating that name, once again back in the room with the same old skin taking me for a tango. The loss of dance rangs feeling down palms, the stark staring walls squeezing me, drips into glass. It had passed as a year, rushing through empty stations, dragging my turn when I gasped at its windows. That night I was home, and it really was Christmas. The brutalist mistletoe kissing goodbye to my trimmings, a fistful of knockout and a clean glass of water. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was delightful. Thank you, Tessa. Okay, our next poet is Emma Storr. She lives in Yorkshire, and her poems have been widely published in magazines and anthologies, and she's won prizes in local and national poetry competitions. Her debut pamphlet, Heart Murmur, published in 2019, was based on her experience of working as a GP. And in 2022, Fairacre Press published Off Cumdens, featuring 41 of Emma's poems paired with Bob Hamilton's photographs of Yorkshire people, streets and landscapes. In 2023, Emma was joint winner of the Jeff Stevens Memorial Prize, organised by Indigo Dreams. This led to the publication of her first solo collection, The Year of Two Winters. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks so much, and thanks very much to both of you, Stephen and Daniel, for including me in this list. I just want to say my poem is not autobiographical, but I've always been interested in how we all take our bodies for granted unless something goes wrong or until it goes wrong. And then I think there's often a feeling of betrayal by the body itself, but also blame, you know, what did I do? What didn't I do that could have caused this? So I'm sort of playing with those ideas in this poem, which is called Feral. I used to trust my body to keep things in balance: heat, hunger, waste, renewal. Now my lungs are speckled in bog cotton spots. My liver bursts out of its skin. My legs are thin, my feet uncertain and far away. I lie in bed and see my shadow trembling on the wall. No one knows if it's something I did or didn't, or caught like a cold that bred delinquent matter. A malignant child eating me alive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, a bursting liver must be so painful. Yeah. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you so much. Yeah. And people are showing their appreciation in the chat for the readers. Thank you. Our next reader, born in Hong Kong, Claire Cox. She now lives and works in Oxfordshire. She's co-founder and associate editor at Ignition Press, winner of the 2021 Michael Marks Publishers Award, and has completed her practice-based PhD at Royal Holloway, University of London, studying poetry and disaster. And she was one of 3 winning poets included in Primers, Volume 5, with 9 Arches in 2020, and she is the winner of the 2020 Wigtown Alistair Reid Pamphlet Prize. Okay, over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you so much, Stephen and Molecules United. I'm flabbergasted because it's the tiniest poem. It's only 8 lines. So yeah, thank you for finding something of merit in something so tiny. It's basically a lockdown poem. So it came out of that period when I don't know about you, but I was having a very different relationship with my house. We'd lived there for about 20 years, not being able to get beyond its walls for a very long time, kind of meant that I couldn't escape the ghosts and the memories and the things that were kind of like rubbing shoulder to shoulder. I'd just come across going up their stairs. And so there was a different sense of what the house was and what So this was maybe a content warning. It's about a miscarriage, basically. So that sense of a nearly life that could have been in that house was difficult to get away from. And the other bit that Daniel mentioned about maybe two things happening at once. I was also interested at that point about where home or house began and ended. Is home the walls that we were constricted by, or is home more expansive? Is it the planet? Do we have an ecological take on what home is? So this is a tiny experiment in what might happen if we were very literal about the house being subject to some of those phenomenon that climate breakdown is forcing upon us, that maybe I haven't othered in this. Anyway, that's an incredibly long ramble for a tiny poem. So here it is. Portrait of my house as desertification. Carpet, the colour of sand. Parched grit drifts into my eyes, my throat, the corners of windowsills. Outside our door, dunes shift and whisper under moonlight. Nothing grows. We scrape at bedrock. No rain, no speech. Nowhere here to rebury our baby's silence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Yeah, I love that. Very powerful. Yeah, so moving on to our next shortlisted poet, Peter Reynard. He is a disabled working class poet and editor of proletarian poetry. His poetry books are Precarious with Smokestack Books, The Combination, a poetic coupling of the Communist Manifesto with Culture Matters, both in 2018, and Manland from Nine Arches Press in July 2022. His debut pamphlet, The Harlot and the Rake, Poems After William Hogarth, is forthcoming with Culture Matters. And his academic essay on the poetry of Fred Voss and Martin Hayes will be published in the journal English in the Autumn. So, thank you, Peter. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Well, thanks, Stephen, for organising the competition, and thanks very much to Dan for shortlisting my poem. I've got polyendocrine disorder, and the way I deal with pain is a new pain, and I'm calm with it being familiar. But the subject of the poem was an unfamiliar pain that came through when I began waking in the middle of the night, sweat drenched, gulping for air, and my whole body aching with pins and needles. I got to the point where I was so weak I couldn't speak. Eventually, benzos gave me some respite, and then venlafaxine and mirtazapine, which is known as Californian rocket fuel, which put out the fire. But it took nearly a year to recover, and so that I negotiated a number of medical institutions, and one weekend, 3 of them were A&E. A disembodied state. Suns come low this time of year, as breath seeps out the sides of maths in a sciatic queue outside A&E, exposed and told, singular. With no store to stand, you sidle through to a front desk review, seeking an open sesame holding pattern on a chair or bed. Collapsing, say you're in crisis, weak, faint, failing. It's not quite, that'll do nicely, sir, but it has you shaking a leg at the next stage corridor, rehearsing lines like a body double. Shaded room, junior doctor with a roster longer than a casting call, listens for your symptoms. Man with wheelchair appended rolls you through to X-ray. Past an ulcerous tongue of people, butchers offcuts of austerity. Kids hang like rabbits from parents, all with a song that no one wants to sing. Back through a door that can't stay still, you're put behind a headless man, bent in his chair. A nurse scribbles at her desk. Blue curtain, weeping cyst, an operation is listed. Next, a man's head moves side to side as if to find some sight. A wait too late. Ta-da! JD arrives with head honcho, an aging man disheveled with expertise. He asks you why you came here, why your GP didn't deal with you, then stops, thinks. With pregnant silence, your wife asks, does it ever get quiet? To which he replies, we never use the Q word. Scrawls a script for alprazolam. I always have problems saying that. The unhappy hour chemist tells you no pharmacy in the UK will issue Xanax. Back to the ward where anger devours any remnant cortisol. You tire of this paradox of care, how patient a patient must be, an expert in advocacy, a placard of pleading. JD, now threadbare from his shift, apologizes for the mistake. Like a street corner score, you propose another benzo. He bows to your request. Catching an arm, your wife revolves you through an exit, through a dim morning, where breath seeps out the sides of mass. Still.
Wow, thank you so much, Pete. Ooh. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Our next poet, Gillian Mellor, unfortunately is unwell this evening. So, and actually Penny Sharman is also unwell. So, but she has actually asked me to read her poem. So I'll try and do it justice. Penny Sharman started writing poetry in her 50s during her menopause and found her voice for the first time as a creative force. Found her voice. She is a published poet, photographer, artist, and therapist, and she's inspired by wild landscapes and relationships between the seen and unseen. Penny has an MA in creative writing from Edge Hill University, and she's had poems published in many magazines such as Spelt, The Interpreter's House, Strix, The North, Finnish Creatures, Orbis, Ink, Sweat and Tears, and Dyslexia. Recently, her poems have reached the shortlist of the Bridport Prize in 2023 and the Michael Marks Environmental Poet of the Year Prize 2023. And she's published several books called Fairground, Swim With Me, In Deep Water, The Day Before Joy, Catching the Heather and the Ash of Time. And she's also the editor of Obsessed with Pipework Poetry magazine. The poem she asked me to say is based on a real story and was written with the mindset of some of us actually do struggle to find their identity. This is called When Siobhan Found Her Twin. She tried to explain to me that Eleanor had always been with her somewhere, inside her bones, her blood, her heart, vying for existence. Siobhan had been doing New Age therapies in the 80s and found her sibling unbirthed, moving around her psyche since inception, since the egg had split. I remember her telling me what a relief it was to find her twin, how it explained her battles, her panic attacks, her overwhelming sense of loss, how she'd crave sex as medicine for feeling worthless, and how such a discovery of otherness opened up her world. I witnessed her progress that day she had an abortion, that day she got married and moved to the other side of the world. How she climbed mountains, kindled a fire in her heart, practiced yoga and mindfulness, made a difference to someone's struggle. Each Christmas she'd send a card from Tasmania with a round robin letter, telling the world her joys and sorrows, with a PS saying, next visit, she'd call me. I never got to tell her how much I missed her verve when she was just Siobhan, a mirror of that wild child stuck fast inside of me. Yeah, thanks Siobhan and Penny for sending that poem in to the competition. And our next reader is Sarah James, or Sarah Leavesley. She's a prize-winning poet again, fiction writer, journalist and photographer. Her most recent collection is Blood Sugar Sex Magic from Verve Poetry Press, published in 2022. She's winner of the CP Aware Award Prize for Poetry in 2021 and highly commended in Forward Prizes. She also runs V Press, publishing poetry and flash fiction. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you to you and Dan for the competition and the judging. And as everyone else has already said, I guess I wasn't sure with my poem because it wasn't physical pain as such that I came to the topic with. It was more emotional and psychological pain, which can of course feel very physical and become very physical. So it's short term, it's a poem of loss. A candle. At home, pine, apple blossom and cinnamon melt from moulded tapers. The wickless stub of a log waits to be burned and turned to vapour. Like you, they layer their presence on everything, even in absence. In the dim chapel, a woman lights a stick of whiteness that smells of nothing but warm wax. It casts a ghostly shadow on the stone wall. The flickering shape of love and missing. At least your body was a slow candle, its wick weaved from something invisible, yet strong. Longer lasting than your mind's forgotten song. The knowledge you prized drifting loose, less tangible than the faint traces of benzene and toluene wafting these scents through the air around me. In the same way, perhaps, that copper and iron knotted into amyloid plaques and tau tangles in your brain, disrupting synaptic sparks. Best I forget too this complex chemistry of loss that I'll never understand. Except memories linger as inevitably as breath until they're gone. I feel your bone cage release. My pain burns on.
Thank you, Sarah. What a lovely ending to the poem. And to mention benzene and toluene, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. We've now reached the prize-winning poet stage. If it's okay, Dan, I might just briefly introduce Samantha before you talk about her contribution. But Samantha Carr, great that you're with us, is based in Plymouth, where she is a PhD in creative writing candidate, exploring chronic illness through poetry. And her poetry has been widely published in Arc, Acumen, and the Storms Journal, among other places. So thank you very much. Over to you, Dan, first.
Thanks. Yeah, and I was going to just touch on a few things that other people have said as well. Emma talked about betrayal and blame around the body and pain earlier, and I think that's a really interesting thing, how we have to attach kind of moral or ethical qualities to people and bodies that are in some ways failing us or failing society or not doing what they're, in inverted commas, supposed to do. So I thought that was really interesting. And I loved when Claire was talking about COVID and the relationship with our bodies in our houses. And I thought the body is really kind of, the house is really the first kind of body in some kind of way. We conceptually think of it as a safe place. And there are a few poems in this competition that kind of looked at ways in which we can mix the body and home, or ideas of home, together. So that was really interesting as well. So thank you. So this poem that came second place is a car crash that never was. And I'm not going to read too much before we get it, but I'll point out a few things. It has a very particular conceit. It's written from a very particular position. And I think often in successful poems, as well as successful poems that talk about complex things, starting from a very understandable physical position or context really, really helps. And as well as that, they used conversation in the poem, which is often incredibly difficult to do. It sticks out like a sore thumb when you have one or more people talking to each other. But yeah, I really love this poem. I love the description of the body. I love the description of the sensations of pain. And yeah, that's it really. I'd love to hear it read.
Thanks,
Thank you very much, Stephen, for organising the competition and for the molecules in general. It's fantastic. And thank you, Daniel, for your words. So I've been really moved listening to other people's poetry tonight. So my project that I'm studying in general is poetry and chronic illness. So this is my life for the next 4 years and previously, but now I'm put it into poetry. So the inspiration for the poem is how I have a condition. One of the conditions I have is hypermobile joint disorder, very, very flexible, which a lot of people think is a great thing until part of you ends up somewhere where it shouldn't be, and that causes a lot of pain. And one of the things that you have when you have a chronic illness is that you tend to normalize how everything is, and then somebody else observes something that isn't normal, and it can create this sort of this feeling inside you that you think, well, which is true? Am I normal or not? So it's playing a little bit with that experience. So a car crash that never was. The masseuse pulls down the towel to expose the naked curve of my lower back. I'd never given much thought to this part of me. I knew it existed through a graceful low hum of pain. I imagine it looks like the rest of me, alien, translucent, as described by my older sister who has a way with cuts. My face looks into the future through this hole. Before I can float through the looking glass, she pulls me back. Is there anything you want to tell me? So many things. Have you been in a car crash? It's too early in the day for metaphors. Should I pretend? Head-on, rear shunt, small truck? But I reply no. Knowing my body has failed, I won't come again. Try pills instead. The accident was last week's gentle massage. you.
Thank you, Sam. Wow, and many congratulations again on your prize.
Stephen, do you mind if I just say a few more about that now it's been read? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
I was just gonna say as well, Samantha, my wife has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobile, so I know a little bit about what you're going through. And it's interesting that you mentioned kind of, I think when we're in pain or when we have disabilities or chronic illness, the way to get through the day is to normalize it. But we know as well, especially when you describe that moment, someone notices something that isn't normal. Every time that happens, it shifts you back out of what you've kind of tried to normalize to try and get through the day or get through the week. And because disability and chronic illness are still stigmatized, there's no way that can't hurt. You know, as much as we can kind of, you know, change the narratives and think about things positively, it's still a jarring experience. But I really love that poem so much. I loved the description, the alien translucency of the skin. The way with cuts, I think, was a wonderful line as well, because it describes another type of pain and emotional pain that people are good at. And yeah, I've just thank you so much for sending the poem in.
Thank you, Dan, so much. Yeah, it's just been wonderful so far to hear all of these, you know, real authentic stories and the different tools that you've used as well to write such great poetry. Okay, so now we move on to our winning first prize poet. I'd love to introduce Leslie Kerwin. She is a poet, broadcaster and sailor who lives in Plymouth. She often writes about the damage done by global capitalism that she observed as a business reporter. She was a finalist in the Wales Poetry Award, and other poems have found homes with Black Bough, Broken Sleep, Atrium, Spelt, The Alchemy Spoon, and Iceflow Press. And Nine Pens published her collaborative pamphlet, Invisible Continents. And she has two pamphlets of her own, soon to be published with Dreich and Hedgehog Press. But before you read the winning poem, Leslie, I'm sure Dan has lots to say.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this being read. Again, I'll talk about it in a way without hopefully giving too much away, but the opening line of this poem, which is also the title, very much reminds me of Sharon Olds, and there's a few things I can point to in this poem and a few things that are kind of intangible. There's incredible enjambment, which you won't see because we're reading it out loud, but if you get a chance to see it, I'm sure Stephen will post it at some point, either on Molecules Unlimited or whatever. You can see the very skillful use of enjambment, which really adds an extra layer to the poem. And really the poem is personification using animals, I guess, or zoomorphism is a technical term, of pain as animals and pain as something that is animalistic. And this is incredibly skillfully done. And as well as that, there is an intangible that is very difficult to talk about in creating writing and poetry. We want to be able to teach everything and write everything down and have modules about, well, this is metaphor. And there are some things that are intangible though. And all I can say is that whether this place that Leslie went to was real or not, to write the poem, they went there 100%, and you can tell that in the poem. And some of the most successful poems for me are ones where you can tell absolutely that the poet has gone back there, every nook and cranny, to get everything they can. There's a real lived-in feel to it. So yeah, I'd love to hear the poem now, Leslie.
Thank you so much to Stephen and Daniel, and I'm actually overwhelmed to be here, given what we've already heard, which is just extraordinary. Daniel talked about the difference between acute and chronic pain, and I did think about that and how different pains have their own characters, and we become very familiar with them because we live with them. So that's really what led to this poem. Let me read it for you. Perhaps you may come to love your pain. Perhaps you may come to love your pain as an animal, wild, but entirely yours. I recall a male tiger whose scimitar nails tore my bladder to shrieks each time I peed, chased me, roaring, to A&E. The fox on my lower back chews for hours on end. His incisors bleed warning signs. I try to ignore his attacks, slap a heat pad on his ravenous face to lull him to sleep. Sometimes a raven lifts out my eyes, fills them with lightning, pops them back in, still fizzing white hot. I retire blind to bed until fire dissolves to black. Our beasts could argue they hurt us only for warning's sake. Torturers have said the same. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. And congratulations again. Yeah, very impactful. Dan, do you have any other thoughts now you've heard it read?
Yeah, it's very easy to, and it's kind of day one advice to talk about senses and poetry and how to utilize the senses. But the male tiger, the scimitar nails tore my bladder. There's assonance there as well as sense play. The fox that chews for hours a day. His incisors bleed warning signs. Everything is there for more than one reason. Everything is there not just because it's part of the poem, but it's connected to the next line and the line afterwards. As well, I can imagine writing this poem and thinking about the raven taking out the eyes. That's one good thought, and then maybe thinking about sensation, but then to make that sensation lightning and to have white hot afterwards is another layer of thinking and another layer of working, and it takes time to write that well and to have everything connect that well. And then yeah, the last couple of lines with the torturers, our beasts could argue they hurt us only for warning's sake. Torturers have said the same. I think that really ended the poem beautifully. So yeah, it was, I'd say so many of the poems here were wonderful and they could have been shortlisted or they could have been in the top two. But what I love about this poem is just incredibly well formed. I can tell they've edited it and drafted it and sent it to friends and got it back. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing it with us, Leslie.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you, Dan, for your unbelievable insights, and for everyone who took part in the competition. I'm sure Dan would agree there are many other good poems that didn't quite make it to shortlisting, and from my point of view, yeah, it was actually quite magical to see the results from this call and just those attempts to combine poems with anything that impinges on the chemical sciences in this topic. Pain really does seem to draw out the very best in creative writing, it seems. So thank you once again to everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. The video recording will be available soon. Please do share news about this event and the poems as well if you like. And yeah, do stay in touch. There will be another online meeting later in the year. I'm already thinking about future competitions and also having an anthology at some point as well. That's the next stage, I think. So does anyone else have any sort of thoughts they want to add before we close? Okay, well, if not, I'd just love to thank you all again and have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Dan.
Yes, thanks to everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you very much.